At 4:07 a.m., Manhattan was quiet in the way only the powerful ever see it. Julian Bennett stepped out of a black SUV beneath the muted glow of Fifth Avenue streetlights. The skyline behind him shimmered cold and silver. His Mercedes had dropped him 2 blocks away. Habit. Privacy mattered when you had investors watching your every move. His collar still carried the faint trace of Lila Monroe's perfume. Expensive, sharp, dangerous. He rode the private elevator to the penthouse, adjusting the Rolex at his wrist, as if resetting time itself. He expected darkness, silence, the comfort of control. Instead, the lights were on. The marble kitchen island gleamed under soft, recessed lighting. And there, placed precisely in the center, sat a small, unmistakable Cartier box. His chest tightened. Julian walked toward it slowly. No shattered glass, no overturned furniture, no dramatic scene, just order. Too much order. Inside the red box lay Caroline's diamond earrings, the ones he gave her on their 10th anniversary at the Plaza Hotel, the pair she never removed, not even to sleep. Beside it, a folded sheet of cream stationery. His hands felt unfamiliar as he opened it. Julian, I know what you did on March 14th. Check the transfer logs. No anger, no accusations, no pleas. Just that. His pulse spiked. March 14th. That was supposed to be invisible. He pulled out his iPhone, opening his banking app, fingers trembling despite years of boardroom composure. A notification blinked at the top of the screen. Access restricted. Julian's reflection in the dark window behind the skyline looked different now. Not powerful, exposed, because the earrings weren't a goodbye. They were evidence. And for the first time in his life, Julian Bennett realized he wasn't the one controlling the narrative anymore. Julian read the note again. I know what you did on March 14th. Check the transfer logs. That was all. No, goodbye. No, how could you? Not even his name signed at the bottom. Caroline didn't write emotional letters. She wrote architectural proposals, clean lines, no wasted words. And this note felt exactly like that. Structural. Intentional. His breathing grew shallow. March 14th. That was the day he authorized the offshore liquidity shift. A temporary maneuver, he had told himself. A silent adjustment to protect the fund during a volatile week. Investors never needed to know. Not if the money returned fast enough. It returned. Mostly. Julian opened his MacBook on the kitchen counter, the Apple logo glowing in the dim light. He typed in his credentials to access the firm's internal server. Access denied. He froze. That wasn't possible. He was the founding partner. He tried again. Same result. A cold sensation crept down his spine. Caroline didn't work in finance. She didn't understand hedge structures or capital routing. For years he had handled everything, reassuring her with summaries she never questioned. Or so he thought. His phone buzzed in his hand. Unknown number. He answered without speaking. Julian. The voice was calm. Male, controlled. This is Nathan Cole. Julian's jaw tightened. The financial journalist who had been requesting interviews about fund transparency. What do you want? Julian snapped. A comment, Nathan replied evenly. Before tomorrow. Tomorrow? March 14th wasn't invisible. The line went dead. Now Julian's pulse thundered in his ears. He looked around the penthouse, Italian marble floors, the Manhattan skyline stretching beyond the glass, the life he had built with precision. Caroline's earrings still lay inside the Cartier box, not abandoned, returned. And suddenly he understood something terrifying. She hadn't left in heartbreak. She had left in strategy. And whatever she knew, she hadn't acted alone. Julian stood in the middle of the penthouse, listening. Silence. Not the peaceful kind. Not the 4 a.m. Manhattan hush he was used to. This silence felt deliberate, constructed. He walked toward the master bedroom. The bed was perfectly made. Caroline sighed untouched. Her silk robe was gone from the hook behind the door. The faint scent of her lavender shampoo had already faded. Closet doors slid open smoothly. Half empty. Not chaotic. Not rushed. The expensive Dior dresses still hung in place. The Birkin bags lined the shelves. But her everyday clothes were missing. Jeans, sweaters. Her worn leather boots she refused to throw away. Julian's throat tightened. She didn't flee. She selected. He moved quickly now, opening drawers, scanning surfaces. Her passport was gone. The small fireproof lockbox they kept important documents in. Open. Inside, his birth certificate, their son Ethan's documents, property deeds. But the envelope containing Caroline's original equity agreement in the fund. Gone. Julian's chest constricted. That agreement was symbolic. She had signed her early capital contribution over to him when the firm launched. It had been a gesture of trust. Love, even. He grabbed his phone and called the building concierge. "This is Mr. Bennett." "When did my wife leave?" A pause. "Mrs. Bennett exited at 2:18 a.m., sir. 2 suitcases. She declined assistance." "Was she alone?" Another pause. Slightly longer. "Yes, sir." Julian ended the call, jaw tightening. Alone didn't mean unsupported. He opened the home security app on his iPhone. Camera feeds. Offline. Every interior camera showed a blank gray screen. System reset. 1:52 a.m. Julian stared at the timestamp. She had wiped the surveillance system before walking out. The woman he thought he understood. The woman he believed would cry, beg, accuse. Instead, she erased her digital footprints and took a legal document he assumed she never thought about again. And for the first time since building his empire on Park Avenue, Julian felt something unfamiliar. He wasn't being confronted. He was being outmaneuvered. There was a time before the penthouse, before Park Avenue, before Julian Bennett learned how to hide money behind polished numbers. Julian leaned back against the marble counter and closed his eyes. He saw her as she used to be. Caroline Hayes. Not Bennett. Not the quiet wife of a rising Wall Street star. Just Kara, the girl sketching blueprints in a Columbia University studio at 2 a.m. Graphite smudged across her fingers, hair tied in a messy knot. They met in a campus cafe near Morningside Heights. He had been ambitious, sharp, already talking about venture capital and leverage ratios. She had listened with interest, not awe. That was what drew him in. She challenged him. "You build numbers," she once told him, smiling over a paper cup of coffee. "I build spaces people actually live in." Back then, his suits were off the rack, so his watch wasn't a Rolex. It was a simple Citizen he'd had since college. They split rent in a cramped one-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn after graduation. The subway rattled beneath their windows at night, and Caroline never complained. When Julian pitched his first investment fund, it was Caroline who rewrote the presentation deck on her MacBook, who stayed up adjusting fonts and layouts, while he rehearsed lines in front of a mirror. When his first investor hesitated, she offered something he never asked for. Her inheritance. A modest amount left by her father. Money she once planned to use to open her own architecture studio. She signed it over to him at a small oak table in their apartment. "No contracts between us," she said softly. "We're building this together." Julian opened his eyes now, staring at the skyline beyond the glass. Somewhere between that oak table and this penthouse, he had started believing the success was his alone. Caroline hadn't screamed. She hadn't thrown anything. She simply removed herself from the foundation she helped build. And foundations, Julian suddenly realized, were the only parts of a structure that truly mattered. The first lie hadn't been dramatic. It hadn't involved perfume or hotel receipts. It had been quiet, reasonable, easy to justify. Julian remembered the night clearly now. 3 years after launching the fund, they were finally moving into the Fifth Avenue penthouse. Boxes everywhere. Ethan was 5, running across the empty marble floors in socks, laughing at the echo of his own voice. Caroline stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching Central Park glow beneath the setting sun. "You made it," she had whispered, pride soft in her voice. That same night, Julian's phone buzzed. Lila Monroe's name lit up the screen. Back then, she wasn't his mistress. She was a brand consultant, organizing a luxury gala at the Plaza Hotel for potential investors. Smart, polished, ambitious. "I have to take this," Julian had said casually, stepping into the hallway. He stayed there longer than necessary. When he returned, Caroline looked at him carefully, not suspicious, just observing. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Board issue," he replied smoothly. "We might need to restructure one portfolio." It wasn't entirely false, but it wasn't entirely true either. That call had not been about restructuring. It had been about a private dinner after the gala, an invitation Lila framed as strategic networking. Julian told himself it was harmless. Business required proximity, or charm, presence. He didn't tell Caroline about the dinner. He didn't tell her about the second glass of champagne, or how easy it felt to be admired without history attached. From that night on, small omissions began stacking like quiet bricks. Late meetings, last-minute flights, muted notifications. Caroline never interrogated him. She trusted patterns more than explanations. And the pattern was changing. Standing now in the silent penthouse, Julian understood something he had ignored for years. The affair didn't begin in a hotel suite. It began the first time he chose image over honesty. And Caroline had noticed. She just hadn't reacted. Not yet. Julian didn't realize Ethan was awake. The boy was supposed to be at Caroline's sister's place in Brooklyn for the weekend. That had been the arrangement whenever Julian had late board dinners. Caroline never argued about it. But this time, Ethan was home. Julian heard the soft shuffle of small feet behind him as he stood frozen in the kitchen. "Dad?" The voice was quiet, sleep-heavy. Julian turned. Ethan stood at the edge of the hallway in his navy pajama set, clutching the worn, stuffed fox he'd had since preschool. His hair was messy, eyes confused, but alert enough to sense something was wrong. "Where's Mom?" Ethan asked. Julian swallowed. "She stepped out." "At 4 in the morning?" The question wasn't accusatory. It was factual. Julian crouched down, forcing calm into his voice. "She needed some space." Ethan looked past him toward the kitchen island. His eyes landed on the Cartier box. "And why are Mom's sparkly earrings here?" he asked softly. Julian didn't answer fast enough. Ethan shifted his weight. "Is this like London?" Julian's chest tightened. "What do you mean?" "The night you said you were in London, but you came home in the morning," Ethan said simply. "I heard Mom crying in the bathroom." The words were not dramatic, not loud, just true. Julian felt something fracture inside him. "Sometimes grown-ups make complicated decisions," he muttered. Ethan frowned, processing that. "You told Mom you were at a meeting," the boy continued, voice small but steady. "But I saw your car on the street when I couldn't sleep." Julian had forgotten that night, forgotten the detail of parking down the block when he returned from Lila's apartment. Children didn't analyze, they observed. Ethan hugged the stuffed fox closer. "Did you make Mom sad again?" Julian couldn't answer, not because in the reflection of the marble floor, beneath the skyline and the silent penthouse, he saw the truth clearly for the first time. It wasn't just Caroline who had been watching him. It was his son. By 8:30 a.m., Julian was standing inside Lila Monroe's Soho loft. Sunlight poured through industrial windows, illuminating exposed brick walls and minimalist furniture. A sleek espresso machine hummed softly on the marble counter. Lila stood barefoot in a silk robe, scrolling through her iPad as if the world were perfectly intact. She looked up when he entered. "You look terrible," she said lightly. "My wife left," Julian replied. Lila didn't gasp, didn't step toward him, didn't even ask if Caroline was okay. Instead, she tilted her head. Did she take anything important? The question landed wrong. Julian stared at her. "What does that mean?" Lila set the iPad down slowly. "Relax. Wives get dramatic when they feel replaced. She'll call you in a few days." "She wiped the security system," Julian snapped. "She took documents." That caught Lila's attention. "What documents?" "The original equity agreement. And something happened on March 14th. A pause. Then something flickered behind Lila's eyes. Not fear. Calculation. "You told me that transfer was clean," she said carefully. "It was," Julian shot back. "Temporary repositioning." Lila walked toward him, lowering her voice. "If she found offshore routing records, that's not a marital problem. That's a compliance problem." Julian's jaw tightened. "She doesn't understand finance." Lila's expression shifted into something colder. "Oh, don't underestimate a woman who leaves her diamond earrings behind," she said quietly. "That's not heartbreak. That's a message." Julian felt the ground shifting beneath him. "Did you tell anyone?" she continued. "No." Lila folded her arms. "Then control it. Freeze accounts if you need to. Call your legal team. Spin the narrative before someone else does." Her tone wasn't emotional. It was strategic. Julian looked at her differently now. Not as comfort. Not as escape. But as someone already calculating her own survival. And for the first time, he wondered whether the woman he betrayed his wife for might be preparing to betray him next. Caroline Bennett was not hiding. She was recalculating. 2 miles from the Fifth Avenue penthouse, across the quiet curve of the Brooklyn Bridge, she sat inside a modest, short-term rental in Brooklyn Heights. The apartment was clean, but unremarkable. White walls, narrow windows, the muted hum of early traffic below. No marble floors, no skyline view, just clarity. Her MacBook Air rested open on the small wooden table. Beside it, a Kindle, displaying a highlighted passage from the 48 Laws of Power. "Never reveal the full extent of your intentions." She had underlined that weeks ago. Caroline wasn't impulsive. She had been gathering fragments for months. Subtle inconsistencies in fund reports, minor discrepancies in Julian's explanations, the offshore routing notation that appeared briefly on a shared financial summary before disappearing the next day. She hadn't confronted him. She documented. At 1:52 a.m., she had reset the penthouse security system. At 2:03 a.m., she transferred digital copies of the original equity agreement and archived transaction logs to encrypted cloud storage. At 2:18 a.m., she walked out with 2 suitcases. Nothing more. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She answered calmly. "Caroline," the voice said. "Nathan Cole." She didn't sound surprised. "You saw it?" "Yes." "And, a pause. "The March 14th transfer wasn't temporary positioning," Nathan replied. "It was concealed leverage." Caroline looked out the window at the quiet Brooklyn street. "I never wanted his empire," she said softly. "I just wanted honesty." "You're about to get more than that," Nathan answered. "Are you prepared for what happens next?" Caroline closed her eyes briefly. She thought of Ethan's small hand in hers. The night she heard him wake when Julian came home too late. The silence she endured so her son wouldn't grow up in chaos. "I'm prepared," she said, "because this wasn't revenge. It was correction." And for the first time in years, Caroline Bennett felt something steadier than heartbreak. She felt control. By Monday morning, the Park Avenue office tower felt different. Julian noticed it the moment he stepped out of the elevator. The usual rhythm of keyboards and quiet phone calls seemed slightly offbeat. Conversation stopped a fraction too quickly when he passed. The glass walls of the boardroom reflected his image back at him. Navy suit tailored perfectly. Montblanc pen clipped inside his jacket, expression composed. He had spent the weekend rehearsing that composure. "Good morning," he said as he entered. 5 partners sat around the long walnut table. Screens glowed with market data. Coffee cups steamed. No one smiled. Thomas Reed, the oldest partner, cleared his throat. "Before we begin," Thomas said carefully, "we've received inquiries." Julian remained standing. "From whom?" "2 institutional investors," another partner answered. "They're asking about liquidity adjustments on March 14th. The date struck the room like a quiet detonation. Julian kept his tone even. "Temporary internal positioning, already reconciled." Thomas folded his hands. "Nathan Cole is publishing an investigative piece tomorrow." A faint ringing filled Julian's ears. "On what basis?" he asked. Thomas slid a tablet across the table. On the screen was a draft headline: "Park Avenue Fund under scrutiny for concealed offshore transfers." Julian scanned quickly. No accusations yet, just questions, timelines, figures, patterns. But the language was surgical. He looked up. "This is speculation." "Speculation that's triggering fear," Thomas replied. "We had a $30 million withdrawal request this morning." Silence settled. Julian's jaw tightened. "We stabilize. We reassure." "And your personal situation?" Thomas added quietly. "Is it stable?" The question wasn't about marriage. It was about credibility. Julian understood that now. In Manhattan finance, reputation was oxygen, and oxygen was thinning. He glanced at the glass walls again, noticing faint reflections of staff outside pretending not to watch. The empire he built on confidence was no longer unquestioned. And for the first time, Julian realized something chilling. The real collapse wouldn't begin with scandal. It would begin with doubt. That evening, Caroline chose the River Cafe, not for nostalgia, for perspective. The restaurant sat quietly beneath the Brooklyn Bridge, Manhattan's skyline glowing across the water like a distant memory. Candlelight flickered against the glass as the East River moved in slow, deliberate currents. Nathan Cole arrived precisely at 7 p.m. No grand entrance, no dramatic greeting. He wore a charcoal coat and carried a leather portfolio instead of a briefcase. When he sat down, he didn't study her face for signs of collapse. He studied her eyes. "You look steady," he said. "I am," Caroline replied. A waiter poured water. The atmosphere was refined but intimate, the kind of place where conversations mattered more than spectacle. Nathan opened his portfolio and slid a single sheet across the table. Transaction summary. March 14th. The numbers were clean at first glance, but beneath the surface, routing codes revealed temporary offshore leverage tied to a private holding account, one Julian never disclosed to partners. "This isn't about infidelity," Nathan said quietly. "It's about exposure." Caroline looked at the skyline across the river. "I never wanted to destroy him," she said, "but I won't let him destroy what I built." Nathan nodded. "There's more," he added. "The signature on the amended equity appendix." Caroline's hand stilled. "I never signed an amendment." "That's what I thought." He placed another document on the table. Digital timestamp metadata. Her signature had been scanned and reattached 2 weeks after the original filing. Forgery. Caroline inhaled slowly. Not rage, not shock, just confirmation. Nathan leaned back. "Once this publishes, the board will move. And Julian? He'll fight," Nathan said. But he won't win." For the first time that evening, Caroline allowed herself a small, quiet exhale. Across the water, the Manhattan skyline shimmered. Still powerful, still beautiful. But distance had changed its meaning. She wasn't running from it anymore. She was preparing to walk back into it, on her own terms. At 6:02 a.m., the article went live. Julian was already awake. He hadn't slept. Not really. He sat in the penthouse office overlooking Central Park, laptop open, Bloomberg ticker scrolling across the muted television. The skyline looked indifferent to his anxiety. His phone buzzed, message after message. Board members, analysts, a private equity rival pretending to be concerned. Then he saw it. Nathan Cole's headline. Park Avenue Fund faces scrutiny over undisclosed offshore leverage. The word fraud was not used. It didn't have to be. The article was clinical, precise. It referenced March 14th in detail, citing timestamp inconsistencies and an amended equity appendix bearing questionable authentication metadata. Julian's name wasn't accused. It was implicated. His email pinged. Subject line, emergency board session, 9 a.m. He exhaled slowly, forcing his hands to steady. Control the narrative. That had always been his strength. He dialed his legal counsel. Prepare a statement, he said. We'll emphasize temporary liquidity strategy. Julian, the attorney replied carefully. There's a complication. What complication? There's evidence the equity amendment was digitally altered after initial filing. Silence. That's impossible, Julian said. We'll need to verify, the lawyer continued. But if Mrs. Bennett did not authorize the revision, this becomes more than a compliance matter. Julian stood abruptly, pacing across the polished hardwood floors. He thought of Caroline sitting at their old oak table years ago, trusting him without paperwork. No contracts between us, she had said. Now contracts were everything. His phone buzzed again. This time it was Lila. Are we safe? Julian stared at the message. Not. Are you okay? Not. What can I do? Are we safe? Outside, early commuters moved through Central Park, unaware that inside the glass tower above them, doubt had already begun to spread. And Julian Bennett realized something irreversible. The story was no longer about an affair. It was about credibility. And credibility, once cracked, rarely heals. By late afternoon, Manhattan had decided, not officially, not publicly, but quietly, in phone calls that weren't returned and meetings that were suddenly postponed. Julian stood inside his corner office on Park Avenue, staring at the muted CNBC panel replaying Nathan Cole's article. No dramatic language, no accusations, just analysis layered with subtle precision. His assistant knocked softly. Mr. Bennett, Miss Monroe is here. Julian hesitated, then nodded. Lila entered without her usual polished confidence. She wore a tailored ivory suit, Cartier bracelet glinting under the overhead lights. But her expression was different, guarded. You didn't tell me the appendix was altered, she said immediately. Julian stiffened. It wasn't altered. It was reformatted. Don't insult me, she replied quietly. Nathan cited metadata. Julian walked behind his desk, reclaiming physical authority. This is a temporary storm. Lila didn't sit. My name is linked to 2 gala donations tied to that March 14th transfer, she continued. If regulators dig, I get dragged. Julian's voice hardened. You benefited from proximity. That works both ways. For a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Not fear. Disillusionment. I thought you were careful, she said. That's why I trusted you. Trusted. The word felt almost ironic. Lila reached into her handbag and placed her phone on his desk. I've already forwarded certain email threads to my attorney, she said evenly. If I'm questioned, I cooperate. Julian stared at her. You'd turn on me? I'd protect myself. The silence between them stretched thin. Outside the glass walls, staff members moved quickly, avoiding eye contact. Lila adjusted her bracelet and stepped back. You should have ended your marriage before risking your empire, she said softly. Now you might lose both. She walked out without waiting for a response. And for the first time, Julian understood the true cost of transactional loyalty. When power shifts, alliances dissolve. And he was no longer the strongest player in the room. Julian didn't expect to see Ethan at the penthouse that afternoon. Caroline had allowed him a brief visit, supervised, scheduled, structured. Even that detail unsettled him. Their marriage had dissolved into calendar entries. Ethan sat at the long marble island, swinging his legs slightly, sketching on a sheet of paper with colored pencils. The skyline behind him looked distant and cold. Julian loosened his tie. "Hey, buddy," he said, forcing warmth into his voice. Ethan looked up, offering a small smile. It wasn't the wide grin he used to wear when Julian came home early from work. It was careful. "Hi, Dad." They sat in silence for a moment. Julian reached for the drawing. It was simple. 3 stick figures standing in Central Park, a sun in the corner, a dog they didn't own. "Is that us?" Julian asked. Ethan nodded. "From last spring." Before everything cracked, Julian cleared his throat. "Mom says we're just figuring things out." Ethan's pencil paused mid-air. "Did you lie to Mom?" he asked quietly. The question wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was steady. Julian felt his chest tighten. "Grown-ups make mistakes," he replied carefully. Ethan studied him with unsettling clarity. "You said you were in London," he continued, "but you were in New York. I saw your car." Julian's breath caught. "And I heard Mom crying in the bathroom that night," Ethan added. "She tried to turn the shower on so I wouldn't hear." The penthouse felt smaller. The marble, the glass, the carefully curated art. None of it shielded him from that memory. Julian crouched down so they were eye level. "I never wanted to hurt her," he said softly. Ethan's eyes didn't waver. "Then why did you?" There was no answer that could pass through a child's filter of honesty. No legal strategy. No financial explanation. Just a simple truth Julian had avoided. He chose himself, and in doing so, he chose against them. Ethan picked up his drawing again. "When Mom is sad," he said quietly, "she doesn't yell. She just gets quiet." Julian swallowed hard, because silence, he was learning, was far more powerful than anger, and Caroline's silence was already reshaping everything. The first withdrawal hit at 10:17 a.m., $30 million. Julian watched the notification appear on the internal dashboard from his office on Park Avenue. The number glowed red against the clean white interface. Controlled, understated, catastrophic. He didn't react immediately. He couldn't. "Temporary panic," he muttered to himself. "It'll stabilize." But within an hour, 2 more requests followed. 8 million, 12 million. Not small investors. Not nervous amateurs. Institutional money. The kind that moved only when trust fractured. His phone rang. Thomas Reed again. "We need to discuss contingency planning," Thomas said without preamble. "There is no contingency," Julian replied tightly. "We reassure. We double down." Thomas exhaled slowly. "Julian, this isn't about reassurance. It's about exposure." Another pause. "And the board has voted to temporarily suspend you from executive decision-making authority until compliance reviews are complete." The words landed harder than any headline. "You can't suspend a founding partner," Julian said. "We just did." The line went dead. Julian stood motionless in the center of his office. Outside the glass walls, employees avoided eye contact. Conversations were muted, deliberate. The energy had shifted from confidence to calculation. He glanced down at his wrist. The Rolex felt heavier now. For years, he believed power came from control, from anticipating markets, influencing narratives, maneuvering behind polished numbers. But control depended on perception, and perception was collapsing. His phone buzzed again. A notification from his bank. Personal credit line under review. Julian stared at the message, a cold realization settling in. This wasn't just a professional correction. It was unraveling. Across the city, Caroline sat quietly in Brooklyn, unaware of the exact numbers, but certain of the direction. And Julian understood something chilling. Empires don't fall in explosions. They fall in withdrawals, one decision at a time. 3 weeks after the article dropped, the Plaza Hotel hosted its annual philanthropic gala. Julian wasn't invited. That detail stung more than the suspension. Instead, he watched from his dim penthouse living room as live-stream clips circulated online. Manhattan's elite stepped across polished marble floors beneath crystal chandeliers, champagne glasses catching golden light. And then he saw her. Caroline. She wasn't dressed in spectacle. No diamonds, no statement jewelry. Just a fitted black gown, minimal, architectural in design, the kind she used to sketch in notebooks years ago. The camera lingered. Whispers followed. She looks composed. She filed. Is it true about the equity dispute? Julian muted the screen. Meanwhile, inside the ballroom, Caroline moved calmly through the crowd. She wasn't there to humiliate him. She was there because the original seed capital of the fund, her inheritance, had partially funded this very charity's endowment years ago. Nathan approached her near the terrace overlooking Fifth Avenue. You didn't have to come, he said quietly. Yes, I did, she replied. I helped build the foundation. I won't hide from it. Across the room, several board members noticed her. Conversations shifted. Respect, subtle but visible, returned. So Caroline didn't attack Julian publicly. She didn't need to. Her presence was enough. By midnight, social media had already framed the narrative differently. Not scandalized wife, but co-founder sidelined. The distinction mattered. Back in the penthouse, Julian stared at the dark reflection in the glass. He thought Lila would attend with him. She didn't. Instead, an alert appeared on his phone. Luxury condo in Soho listed for sale. Monroe Holdings, LLC. Lila had liquidated assets. Protection. Julian exhaled slowly. The gala wasn't his fall. It was Caroline's return. And in Manhattan, presence was power. She had just reclaimed hers. Julian hadn't planned to come to Central Park, but the penthouse felt unbearable. Too quiet, too large, too reflective. So he walked. The November air cut sharp against his face as he crossed Fifth Avenue. The trees were nearly bare now, branches skeletal against a pale gray sky. Runners passed him without recognition. No one paused. No one whispered. For the first time in years, he was invisible. He found an empty bench overlooking a frozen stretch of grass, where children usually played in warmer months. He sat down slowly, resting his elbows on his knees. The Rolex was still on his wrist. He stared at it. Time had always been his advantage. Early investments, early exits, early positioning. He built his career on timing. But he had misjudged one thing. Caroline's silence. A notification vibrated in his coat pocket. Email. Formal notice of forensic audit. He didn't open it. He already knew. His personal accounts were under review. The board had frozen discretionary spending. The Park Avenue office he once commanded now operated without him. A gust of wind swept through the park, lifting dry leaves across the path. Julian closed his eyes. He thought about the first apartment in Brooklyn, the subway rumbling beneath their window, Caroline laughing when they burned pasta because they couldn't afford takeout. Back then, he had nothing. But he wasn't alone. Now he had the penthouse, and no one inside it waiting. His phone buzzed again. Message from Caroline. Ethan has a school recital Friday, 6 p.m. You're welcome to attend. No anger, no blame, Just information. Julian swallowed hard. She wasn't erasing him from Ethan's life. She was redefining his role in it. The wind quieted. Around him, Central Park moved forward as it always had, indifferent to power shifts and financial collapses. So Julian leaned back against the cold bench. For years, he had chased expansion, bigger offices, larger portfolios, louder applause. Now, sitting alone beneath winter trees, he understood something painfully simple. He hadn't lost everything, but he had lost what mattered most. Caroline didn't return to Fifth Avenue. She returned to herself. 6 weeks after she left the penthouse, a small brass plaque was mounted beside a renovated brownstone office in Brooklyn Heights. C. Hayes Studio. Not Bennett, not co-founder's wife, just her name. Inside, sunlight filtered through tall windows onto drafting tables and neatly arranged fabric samples. Her MacBook Air sat open beside architectural renderings for a boutique hotel renovation in Dumbo. The project wasn't massive. It wasn't Park Avenue prestige. It was hers. Nathan stood near the doorway, observing quietly. "You could have asked for half the firm publicly," he said. Caroline adjusted a set of blueprints. "I asked for what was mine." And she had received it. The forensic audit confirmed the amended equity appendix had been digitally altered. The board moved swiftly, not out of loyalty to her, but to protect the firm. Julian was permanently removed from executive control. Her original capital contribution, with accrued value, was restored under a settlement agreement. Not dramatic, not explosive, just documented truth. Caroline turned toward the window overlooking the Brooklyn skyline. Manhattan still shimmered across the river, but it no longer defined her success. Her phone buzzed. A message from Ethan's school. Recital reminder. Friday, 6 p.m. She smiled softly. Work mattered. Reputation mattered. But presence mattered more. Nathan stepped closer. "You don't look relieved," he observed. "I'm not relieved," she replied. "I'm rebuilt." Outside, a delivery driver set down an Amazon box at the front door. Samples for a client presentation. Ordinary, grounded, real. Caroline exhaled slowly. She had been underestimated because she was quiet, because she didn't fight loudly. But correction doesn't require chaos. It requires patience. Her name gleamed subtly on the brass plaque outside. Not attached to scandal, not attached to collapse, attached to ownership. And for the first time in years, Caroline Hayes was building something that no one could manipulate, because this time, the foundation was hers alone. The settlement conference took place in a quiet midtown law office overlooking Madison Avenue. No cameras, no headlines, on just polished wood, legal pads, and the soft hum of city traffic beyond the glass. Julian arrived first. He no longer wore the Rolex. The Montblanc pen was gone from his pocket. His suit was still expensive, but it hung differently now. Less armor, more fabric. Caroline entered 10 minutes later with her attorney. She did not look at him immediately. The documents were already arranged neatly on the conference table. Asset division, equity restoration, custody structure, a formal acknowledgement of the altered appendix, phrased carefully to avoid criminal escalation, but clear enough to protect her permanently. Julian read each page in silence. No arguments left. No leverage. The forensic audit had done what Caroline never had to. It exposed the manipulation without spectacle. He picked up the pen provided by the firm. Generic, a disposable, and signed. The sound of ink on paper felt heavier than any market crash. Caroline signed next. Her signature was steady, not shaking, not rushed. When it was finished, the attorneys exchanged copies. Chairs shifted. Briefcases clicked shut. Julian finally looked at her. "You could have destroyed me publicly," he said quietly. Caroline met his gaze. "I didn't need to." There was no triumph in her expression, just clarity. Ethan's custody agreement was balanced, structured, protective. No child pulled into scandal. Julian nodded once. I never meant for it to go that far. It went that far the first time you chose silence, she replied. The meeting ended without drama. Outside, Manhattan moved as it always did. Taxis honking, people rushing, skyscrapers reflecting late afternoon light. But inside that office, when something irreversible had closed, Julian walked away diminished. Caroline walked away restored. Not because she won, but because she no longer needed to fight. Justice, in the end, hadn't been loud. It had been precise. Julian stood outside the Brooklyn brownstone just after sunset. The brass plaque beside the door caught the fading light. C. Hayes Studio. He read it twice, not Bennett. The simplicity of it unsettled him more than any legal document had. He had texted earlier. Can we talk? Caroline's reply had been brief. 10 minutes. The door opened before he could knock again. She stood there in a charcoal sweater and dark jeans, sleeves pushed up slightly, a pencil tucked behind her ear. No diamonds, no performance, just calm. He stepped inside. The office smelled faintly of fresh paint and brewed coffee. Drafting tables lined one wall. Fabric samples lay arranged with intention. It wasn't grand. It was real. I won't take long, Julian said. I know, she replied. They stood facing each other beneath warm, recessed lights. I'm sorry, he began. Not polished, not rehearsed. For the lies, for the manipulation, for choosing ego over us. Caroline listened without interruption. I thought I was protecting what we built, he continued, but I was protecting myself. Silence filled the space between them, not hostile, not heavy, just honest. You didn't lose everything, Caroline said quietly. You lost the version of yourself that had integrity. The words landed without cruelty. I never stopped loving you, Julian admitted. I know, she replied, but love without respect becomes erosion. He nodded slowly. I don't expect you to come back, he said. You shouldn't, she answered gently. A car passed outside. The city moved forward. Julian glanced around the studio, at her name, her work, the life she rebuilt without spectacle. You look lighter, he observed. I am. There was no dramatic goodbye, no door slammed. When Julian stepped back onto the sidewalk, the evening air felt colder than before. But inside the brownstone, Caroline closed the door softly, not to shut him out, but to protect what she had finally reclaimed. And for the first time, Julian understood the difference between losing a person and losing their trust. Spring arrived quietly in Central Park. The trees that had stood skeletal through winter were now brushed with soft green. Children ran across open grass, and street musicians filled the air with light jazz that drifted toward Fifth Avenue. Caroline sat on a park bench beside Ethan, watching him rehearse lines for his school play. His voice was animated, confident, untouched by the turbulence adults had navigated around him. Mom, did I say it right? He asked. You said it perfectly, she replied, smiling. Across the pathway, Nathan approached with 2 cups of coffee from a nearby cafe. He handed one to Caroline, his movements unhurried. You look like someone who finally exhaled, he said. I did, she answered. The past months had been precise, controlled, necessary. Julian's removal from the firm was finalized. The board restructured leadership. Investors stabilized. His name no longer dominated financial headlines. Consequences had unfolded without spectacle. Caroline hadn't chased revenge. She had chosen correction. Nathan sat beside her, watching Ethan perform an exaggerated bow at the end of his imaginary stage. You rebuilt quickly, he said quietly. I rebuilt honestly, she replied. There was a difference. The diamond earrings still rested in a small velvet box inside her studio drawer. She hadn't sold them. She hadn't worn them. That chapter no longer required display. Nathan reached into his coat pocket, but instead of a ring box, he pulled out a folded sheet of architectural paper. "I don't have a dramatic speech," he admitted, "but I'd like to build something with you. Slowly. Intentionally." Caroline looked at him, steady, thoughtful. "Partnership?" she asked. "In every sense." Ethan ran toward them, laughing, unaware of the quiet shift happening on the bench. Caroline didn't answer immediately. She looked at her son, at the skyline, at the life she reclaimed. Then she nodded, not because she needed saving, but because she was no longer afraid of building again. And this time, the foundation was chosen, not assumed. And so, the story closes here. My wonderful friends, if you're still here at this moment, I believe something in this journey touched your heart in a quiet, personal way. Maybe it wasn't the scandal. Maybe it wasn't the downfall. Maybe it was the silence, the dignity, the strength it takes to walk away without screaming. Caroline's story reminds us of something deeply human. Power built on ego eventually collapses, but integrity rebuilds itself from the inside out. In a world that often rewards noise and dominance, she chose something different. Self-respect. As Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Caroline didn't control Julian's choices. She controlled her response. There's also a quiet truth here about selfishness. When we choose ourselves at the expense of others, we may win temporarily, but we lose what truly matters. Real success isn't dominance. It's alignment between who we are in private and who we present in public. If you've ever stayed silent to protect your peace, if you've ever rebuilt quietly after betrayal, this story was for you. And if it resonated, don't leave without letting us know. Like this video, share it with someone who needs strength tonight, and subscribe, because sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones that help us heal. This story is a fictional dramatic narrative created for entertainment and inspirational purposes only. All characters, events, financial situations, and legal developments portrayed in this content are imagined and not intended to represent any real individuals, companies, or ongoing investigations. While the storyline explores themes such as marital conflict, financial misconduct, and personal growth, it does not make factual claims about real organizations or public figures. Any references to locations like Manhattan or well-known establishments are used purely as part of the storytelling setting. The legal and financial elements described are simplified for narrative flow and should not be interpreted as professional advice. Viewers are encouraged to understand this content as creative storytelling designed to convey emotional lessons about integrity, accountability, and resilience,